They say you never stop being a parent, bet. What happens when the boy who has spent half his life in your home, the boy woes teenage angst you navigated with patience sighs, knocks on your door in the middle of the night, and you look into his eyes and see a man, and what happens in a secret dormant part of you, a part you thought was long dead and buried, looks back. The knock came just before midnight, a sharp intrusive sound against monotonous drone of the television. He had been curled up on the couch, a thick cashmere blanket wrapped around my legs, lost in the particular brand of loneliness reserved for women in large empty house. Me husband Richard was in another time zone, closing another deal. His absence was a constant, a low hum beneath the surface of my life, something I had long ago learned to accommodate. The sound of a knock, especially that late, made my heart give a painful lurch. I disentangled myself from the blanket, my pulse fluttering, and padded toward Theodore. The porch light illuminated a familiar face shadowed under the hood of a gray sweatshirt. Helena, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. He offered a sheepish half smile. I didn't wake you, did I, Alex? What on earth are you doing, girl? I asked, my voice a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't to me name. I fumbled with the lock and quickly stepped aside. He stepped into the foyer, bringing the chill of Thotham night in with him. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, a few months back, not aged precisely, Boutevere, as if he were carrying an invisible weight on his broad shoulders, was 28. A man by any measure, but in the dim light of the hall I could still see the ghost of the 14-year-old boy I'd first met, all sharp angles and guarded eyes, the day I married his father. I was back from a work thing in D.C., Hesed, dropping his overnight bag near Thibbench with a heavy thud. Figured I'd stop BC if you were still up. You're lucky I wasn't in bed already, I said, closing door behind him, trying to keep my tone like casual. But truthfully, my heart ached in that worn way it often did. I hadn't expected to see him, and something about the way he looked at me, a raw vulnerability in his gaze that he rarely showed, made me pause. He needed something more than just a place to crash. For the night he followed me into the kitchen, a vast sterile space of white marble and stainless steel, that always felt too big for one person. I instinctively put the kettle on. It was our thing, a ritual established during his tumultuous teenage years. Late night talks over tea, a fragile bridge built between a weary boy and the woman who was not his mother back. Then he'd talk about a difficult trafficker or a girl who'd broken his heart. Tonight, he said, very little. You look tired, I said, watching him settle at the kitchen island, rubbing his face with both hands. Yeah, he sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. It's been a rough few weeks. He didn't offer more, and I didn't press. I had learned long ago that with Alex silence was a necessary prelude. I handed him a steaming mug on, sat on the stool across from him, we sipped in silence for a while, the kitchen dim except for the warm pendant light that pulled on the marble between us. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, a lonely, restless sound. It felt as if we were tucked inside a snow globe, still and separate from the rest of the world. Do you ever feel like you missed your shot? He asked suddenly, his voice quiet but steady in the stillness. He blinked. Your shot? Yeah, like in life. He stared down into his mug as if Thenswer were floating in the dark liquid. That window, where everything was supposed to happen, marriage, the right career, that baseline level of happiness everyone else seems to have and now had. Off, shrugging a gesture, Afra found a feet. I looked at him, really looked at him, the tightness in his shoulders, the weary lines around high sides, the way his fingers curled around thigh warm ceramic mug, as if he were grounding himself. You're 28, Alex. That window isn't closed. Gave a dry, humorless chuckle. It feels like it is. All my friends are getting married, having kids. I got passed up for another promotion last month, and I can't remember the last time I had a real genuine laugh. That last part hit me like a physical blow, not because I hadn't sensed his struggle in our infrequent phone calls, but because he'd finally said it out. Loudhead let the mask sleepy reached across the cool expanse, off marble, placing my hand over his skin was warm, his hand strong. Hey, I said softly, you're allowed to feel lost, you didn't have to carry it all alone. His fingers turned under mine, gently closing around my hand. The gesture was meant to one of comfort, of connection, but it sent a strange, unexpected current up a warmth that had nothing to do with tea. I don't know why I drove here at night, he murmured, his gaze fixed on steam rising between us. I guess he just needed to be somewhere that felt real. You came home, I whispered, thwart feeling both true and complicated my tongue. He nodded, his eyes glassy. No. Yeah, I did. We stayed like that for a long while, not speaking, just holding hands over cooling tea in a quiet kitchen. There was a comfort in the stillness, but beneath it a new tension hummed, a low-frequency vibration that I hadn't felt before. Eventually I pulled my hand away, jealous of his warmth, immediate and sharp. He stood and placed my hand on his shoulder, a gesture I'd made 1,000 times before. In it, It felt different. The solid muscle under his sweatshirt felt foreign. Come on, I said, my voice a little too bright. Let's get you settled. You can't take your old room. He stood too butt-poused before following me. Thanks Helena for still being here always. I sighed softly and led him down the hall. I turned off the light. Behind us, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the kitchen window to shadows, moving together, bridging the gap of years' insolence with one simple unexpected night hat. Already felt heavy with consequence. I didn't sleep much. I lay in my empty king-size bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the look and high size, and more unsettlingly thinking about the jolt I'd felt when he'd taken me hand. It was foolish. I was his stepmother. I was a 4-5-year-old woman in a stable, if sterile marriage, but that feeling had been undeniably a flicker of life in a part of me he thought had long since turned to dust. Smell of coffee must have stirred him. I heard the creak of the hallway floorboards, and moments later, Alex appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked worn than the night before, but still far from rested. Morning, he said, his voice low and raspy. Good morning, there's coffee. I motioned to the pot. Me movements feeling studied. Confused. Watched him from the stove as I scrambled some eggs, resisting the ergetto, filled the silence with meaningly waited. Do you ever regret things you didn't do? He asked after a few minutes, echoing his late-night sentiment. I turned off the burner and joined him at the table, placing a plate in front of him. Of course, I said. He think everyone does. He nodded slowly, staring into his cup. There was someone, a woman I met last year. I never told you or Dad about her. My brow lifted. No, you didn't. She was different. A small sad smile touched his lips. Grounded kind. She made me want to slow down, pay attention, but I got scared. I pushed her away, kept telling myself I wasn't ready, that I needed to focus on my career first. Were you in love with her? The question was out before I could stop it. He hesitated. I think I could have been Theech, in his voice pulled at me, not for his missed relationship, but for the vulnerability it took for him to admit it, and for another darker reason. I refused to name a strange possessive pang of relief. I spent so long chasing what I thought I was supposed to want. He continued, his voice laced with self-affirmation. Moni, recognition, the right title. I never realized how lonely that path would be. You're realizing it now. I sagently, that counts for something. He looked up, his eyes locking with mine. I didn't want to wake up one day and realize I've built a life I don't even like, then build a new one. I said, I voice firmer than I expected. It's never too late to burn down a life that isn't working. Words hung in the air, feeling dangerously personal. Later, that afternoon, the quiet of the house became too much. I found him in his old room, sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxy soft his past life yearbooks, sports trophies, forgotten relics, Islandagains, the doorframe, watching him, feeling nostalgic. I asked. He looked up, a wry smile on his face, feeling old. Held up a framed photo. It was of me and his father at our wedding. I was 31, radiant and full of a hope that now seemed painfully naive. He was standing beside me in the photo, a skinny 14-year-old in an ill-fitting suit, looking profoundly uncomfortable. You were so beautiful, he said quietly, his gaze shifting from the photo to me. You still are. The compliment landed not as a pleasantry, but as something heavier, more deliberate. I felt a blush creep up me neck. Thank you, Alex. He set the photo down and picked up another. This only was of just me, taken a year or two after the wedding on a beach vacation. I was laughing, my head thrown back, my hair wild in the wind. I remember that day. Hest, his voice soft, you taught me how Toskipstone's dad was on a conference call in the hotel room. The memory and his quiet emphasis on his father's absence created a bubble of intimacy around. Use it was us against the world, us, the ones were left behind. You seem happier in this picture than you do now. I observed his perception once again, slicing through my carefully constructed dom. Life changes you. I said, a hollow excuse. Does it have to? He stood up, closing the distance between us was close enough now that I could smell the faint scent of coffee on his breath, see the flecks of gold in his breath eyes. Or do we let it? My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. Air in the small room was thick, charged. This was a line, a dangerous shimmering line, and we were both standing right on the edge of it. Bait vening after a dinner of tense, polite tech conversation. He sat next to me on thick. The fire flickered in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on his face. He'd started writing again. He told me, pulling out a worn notebook. He read a few lines aloud. They weren't just about feeling lost, they were about longing, about a hunger for something real, about seeing a light in a dark room and wanting to get closer to it. He finished reading and looked directly at me, and the subtext was a deafening whir in the quiet room. He wasn't just talking about a metaphorical light, he was talking about me. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, his voice Borrelia whisper. You don't have to know, I said, my own voice trembling slightly. You just have to keep going. But where we going? The question hung between us, a terrifying, exhilarating, unknown thick night. As I lay in bed, I heard his door open and his soft footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside my room. I held my breath, my entire body rigid with a mixture of fear and a wild, unthinkably indefinite, a moment that stretched into an eternity. The footsteps retreated. Let out a breath. I didn't realize Edie Bean, holding my body, trembling with aftershock. The next morning, the rain had stopped the world outside. The kitchen window looked washed clean. Knew there was a peace in his voice that hadn't been there before, a looseness in his shoulders. I'm going to take some time off, he said, turning toward me. Real to me, no laptop, no pretending to be okay. That sounds like the best decision you've made in years, I said, my heart sinking and soaring at the same time. He hesitated, his gaze intense. Would it be all right if I stayed here for a little while, just a few days, maybe a week? You never have to ask, I said, few words, feeling both like a comfort and a warning. This will always be your home. He nodded and hugged me, not the Russia-distracted hug of recent years, but thickened, that lingers, that means something hit us. Arms were strong around me, his body warm and solid against mine. I felt his breath against my shoulder, steady and slow, and I had to fight the urge to melt into him. The days that followed were a dangerous dance of domesticity and desire. We worked in the garden, our hands brushing as we reached for the samatools. We cooked dinner together, moving around each other in the kitchen with an easy familiar rhythm that felt dangerously intimate. The line we had approached in his bedroom, blurred and dissolved completely. The house was no longer a safe haven, it was a pressure cooker filled with unspoken words and lingering glances. One night we sat on the back porch watching the stars come out. The air was cool, and I shivered without a word. He took off his sweatshirt and draped it over Miss Holder's. It was warm from his body and smelled of him. The gesture was so simple, so kind, and yet so profoundly shattered the last of my resolve. Helena, he said, his voice low and serious in the darkness. Don't, he whispered, not sure what I was asking him not to do. Don't speak, don't ruin this, it make me face what this is. He turned on the bench to face me, taking my hand in his. I came here because I was lost, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. But it's not just about my career or feeling like I'm behind my friends. It's you. It's always been using you in this big empty house, so quiet and sad it makes me want to. I didn't. No, don't say it, I pleaded, my voice breaking. But he did. I think I'm falling in love with you, Helena. The words hung in the cool night air, beautiful and terrible, and the most terrifying part was not what he had said, it was the echo it found in the deepest, silent part of my own heart. He looked at him, this man, this boy, my husband's son, and I knew I was lost. The quiet of my house had been filled with a new kind of sound. It wasn't the sound of Fifth's saxophone, but it was music, all thesome, a dangerous, ruinous, beautiful, meaty, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was going to let it play. We tell ourselves that our lives are built on the foundations of logic and responsibility. Follow the rules, we honor our vows, we accept the quiet comforts of life, but the human heart has its own wild, untamable logic. It's drawn to warmth, to connection, to the one person who looks into the fortress you've built around yourself and doesn't see the walls, but the prisoner inside is. Times the greatest risk is everything down. It's choosing to stay in a beautiful silent cage when Samoan has quietly, unexpectedly left door wide open. If this story a booth complex and often forbidden papists heart can take resonated with you, invite you to explore more of these intricate human dramas with us. Consider subscribing to the channel for tales that aren't afraid to venture into these